Okay, we are now recording. Okay, welcome everybody to this Future of HR webinar series sponsored by Peer Genius. My name's Erica Farmer. I'm the founder and director of Welcome to Learning Limited. It's great to see some familiar faces on the session today. With me today is Sarah Potter, founder and director of Peer Genius. So just over to you, Sarah.
Good morning, everybody. Like Erica said, it is great to see so many familiar faces on the call. So it's been great to catch up with you over the last few weeks. For those of you that don't know me, I normally run HR Director Forums across the Midlands. And now, as you can see from sort of the past 6 or 7 weeks, we have now gone global. So we've had webinars from across New York to Shanghai. So then I was thinking, what next? So really it is about bringing that sort of influential HR thought leadership to you. So that's kicking off with Perry today, and next week we've got Dave Urick, or Urich, we were just talking. So I'm just really keen to sort of get feedback from you. Hopefully now the portal's open, we can look to the future. And then we're also doing some working groups. So we've got our first one, that's this Thursday, which is about us devising a return to the business plan. So following lockdown, what is that going to look like? And at the moment, we've got 22 HR directors that are on that working plan group. And I've also set up some other working groups around culture, the future of learning, the future of recruitment, and also data and analytics. So really keen to sort of hear your thoughts if you'd be interested in any of that. So the next phase of this really is about that innovation. So I hope you enjoyed today's session, and I look forward to the feedback. Thank you, Erica.
Great, thank you so much, Sarah. And yeah, Peer Genius is really starting to rock and roll, isn't it? So it's fantastic to see what you've got out there in the digital offering, etc., which is fantastic news. So talking about fantastic news, we have the wonderful Perry Timms joining us today. Very excited that Perry's with us. Perry is a thought leader in the HR arena and the founder of PTHR, People Transformation HR. And Perry, over to you. Tell us around who you are, what do you do, PTHR, what are you all about?
Thank you, Erica. Thank you, everybody. Yeah, it's interesting when you have to describe yourself, so I'm quite happy to do it. But I guess I've been in HR now for about 16 years. Prior to that, I worked in the civil service and I was on lots of IT projects. So I've always had this fascination of the intersection between people, technology, and then sort of work that gets done. And I found my way into HR through learning and development and gradually got into a sort of more OD mindset, I guess you'd say. So if people ask me for a short version of what I do, I say I'm in OD, org design, org development. And if they have more time, and I won't go too far down this line, but I'm really into a very progressive kind of HR and org design function that talks to some of the things I think we're now experiencing: dispersed leadership, very collaborative cultures, where it isn't about rules and enforced hierarchical cascade, but more about an operational sort of rhythm, I suppose, that's quite fluid and inclusive. And so I've researched extensively things like self-managed organizations where they don't have that management structure. And they fascinate me because they don't even have a dependence and a need for HR. They do a lot of it themselves. So I guess my kind of posing thought is, what is HR in that future where we are much more liberated and self-regulated? And so the work I do is often helping companies to create a version of that as a more responsive, fluid, and I guess you'd say creative version. Little did I know it would almost become a working norm in about a month and a half. But I've got some lovely reports back from clients I've worked with in the past that are testifying to the fact that they're more able to respond because of the work we did a couple of years ago to get them into that much more inclusive and I guess you'd say adaptable sort of frame. So that's what I really love, is where HR creates a different type of organization that's much more about people.
Fabulous. That's it's very inclusive, the work you do. I know you talk a lot about energy, you talk around, you know, what does HR of the future look like? So to put some more meat on the bones of that, what kind of things are you working on specifically for the clients that you've got at the moment? Bearing in mind we sit in this COVID-19 bubble at this time.
Yeah, we do. So towards the tail end of last year, working with a client in telecoms who've got a globally dispersed engineering set of teams. So, you know, if you started in sort of California and went all the way across to Tokyo, that's often where they've got a place. And they wanted to be much more, they called them engineer-led, so that they were responsive and they took accountability and they didn't need so much hierarchy and bureaucracy, because they needed to be nimble humble and respond to clients and sort of service their own, almost like enterprise within. And we've been doing that since about October when we started the work. And so that's all been completely virtual, with directors I've never met and never even seen, but only had conversations with over sort of Skypes and Teams calls. And we're getting them to a point now where we're creating a pool of resources that they can call on that help them understand, how do I make decisions when I don't just defer it up to a line manager, because they don't have that structure anymore. And so we're working on how can we create the confidence and the processes that can help people feel really comfortable in being accountable and taking decisions as far as they can before they need some sort of signatory and sign off. And that's been very deliberate by the client, who have really, really wanted to like free them up to do their work as almost like an internal entrepreneur. And then we've got a city council that wants to transform its HR function so that it's much more responsive to the needs of a very changing borough. We've got a small consultancy firm who want to boost the kind of impact that their business partners have with their business leaders. And that's been brought to sharp focus, I think, by COVID responses, where everybody's looked to HR and gone, what do we do now? And they've had to step into some very unfamiliar territory to keep people safe, to keep work happening, to keep clients in the loop, to make sure that recruitment is still happening and onboarding still happening, even though it's not like in real life. And so they've kind of had a bit of a, I won't say a shock, but they've had to respond incredibly quickly. Now they need to take stock and go, okay, what have we learned from this? How do we utilize this newfound credibility, I suppose you'd say, that we have with our business colleagues? So those are some really interesting sort of pieces of work that are COVID-19 linked, but there was clearly some intent and some need to work on that before this crisis. And so that's quite reassuring that it isn't just a bolt out of the blue as a reaction. It's a little bubbling up thing that's now come right to the top of the agenda. So it's fascinating. There's lots of psychology involved, but it's all about this interplay between people, systems and work.
And I know in your TED talk, you talk a lot about energy and the workplace as well. And then you've kind of, in your recent article, you've talked about the norm, almost if it's a bit of not a dirty word, but an interesting word to explain a little bit. So talk to us a bit around your thinking on workplaces that have been, and then workplaces of the future. What are we trying to grasp onto? What do we need to let go? You know, give us your thoughts on that.
So I'll start with the energy piece, just to give that sort of bit of clarification. And, you know, without wanting to insult my own profession, we've been gripped, I think, a little bit by business leaders who say, I want certainty, rigor, control, consistency, because that's what I need from my people so that I can, you know, monitor the outputs and know that I'm investing in them and there's a return on it. And I've always found that a bit puzzling, because it completely stunts all those other brilliant things that we are, which is creative, artistic, responsive, and yet they don't value those things. Yet if there's a customer problem that is completely unique and the system isn't built for it, we find workarounds and we adapt and we keep a customer happy. And so I've often wondered, why is that? And it's all about this plug-in energy they see as a person who turns up with energy that's at a pretty high level, stressful commute notwithstanding, and then they expect them to work really hard. And at the end of the day, they've run down the energy, so they let them go home at 5:30, 6:30, whatever. And then I guess we do some relaxing, regenerative things. That's the idea, I suppose. And I harked back to John Maynard Keynes' prediction in the 1930s that with automated technology just starting to emerge pre-war, we would have a life of leisure and work about 15 hours a week. And all I saw was people working more and harder and in more stressful and complex situations. I'm like, this wasn't the script that was set out. How did this happen? And I think in pursuit of efficiency and I guess you'd say sort of profiteering, we have commoditized people so much that we don't value their energy enough, that we allow them to regenerate it during the day so they don't go home empty, they don't suffer with mental ill health. And I think it was really stark when I read that the UK in 2016-17 lost 1.5 million working days because of workplace-related stress. So the work people were doing was impairing their own health. And I'm thinking, how is that economically sensible, let alone ethically and morally sound? So I looked into the energy piece and I started to discover that what's going on with people is they are so caged by their work that they never feel liberated and can recharge in a very sensible way. Yet when I found organizations that didn't put people in a cage, they could experiment, they could learn, they could create new relationships. They had this regenerative, I didn't see anybody in those organizations going home at 5:30 exhausted. I saw them actually buoyed by their day and almost vibrant with their family. And I found one company in particular who stumbled across a KPI that they're now very proud of. They're an engineering company called Barry Waymiller, and they talk about having the lowest divorce rate of any company in the US. And they're really proud of the fact they send people home with energy to look after their family and loved ones, not depleted and miserable and all those kind of things. And so I'm thinking, what are we doing to people? We are designing in systems that, like a smartphone, just drain the life out of people and still expect them to be loyal and dedicated and collegiate and all those kind of things. So that's the energy piece. And so then this links to this blog post of mine about normal. When people said, I can't wait to get back to normal, I'm like, really? You want to get back to that? After discovering, okay, notwithstanding homeschooling and some frustrations working in not ideal workstations, you want to go back to that again when you're depleted and almost like your creativity is wasted, when you've just shown you can work on your own merit, you can adapt and flex your day, you can still be productive and serve customers. And I just got a really sort of anxious response about returning to normal. I thought initially it might be because I'm into progressive thinking, and I thought, no, going back is not what we do. But then I realized there were lots of good things about camaraderie in the workplace and escape from, you know, sort of normality that some people might not appreciate. So I gave them some credit for that. But then I thought, hang on though, squeezed onto tubes in less than healthy situations now, really do we want to go back to that kind of normal? So I almost wanted to eradicate that thought process and go, we need a new normal. We need something that actually is perhaps abnormal, but is much more in spirit with what we're starting to find now about spending time with family, about having less stress about commutes and all that kind of thing. So yeah, that was, I think, the basis behind it. So it was linked to the energy source, but it was more about, you know, that kind of retrograde step as I saw it.
Brilliant. And yeah, particularly that kind of link to how you translate your energy into that new normal as well. Like you said, there's a really nice clear link. So what's your new normal, Perry? What do you think your new normal might look like?
So my new normal is definitely something where you use technology to connect to people even though you're apart from them. I taught my dad how to use video calling the other day, and so he did that for the first time ever. And the fact that he thought it was some kind of weird science, he proved how different that connection is compared to just being on the phone or whatever. So the team and I are dispersed anyway. We're in Mexico, we're in Romania, we're in different parts of the UK, we're also in Australia. So time zone's a bit of an issue, but we use Slack as a platform. We check in, we share, we collaborate, we do this kind of thing. On a Friday, we just have like a half hour where we talk about our favorite movie, we talk about how we're feeling about the week. And actually that new normal has created the same connection I used to experience if we were in the same place. So I think we're now supplementing our isolation by strong technologically sort of enabled connections. But also we're thinking about our products and services, the things we do for a living. And we're all going, do you know what? We have probably always wanted to do more dispersed, remote and smaller chunks of intervention for people. But everybody used to go, no, box it into a day, come to a classroom and teach us. And we were like, okay, we'll do that. And it was fun, don't get me wrong. We got to know people and see them in that space. We're actually quite enjoying the fact that we could almost be a 24/7 company across those time zones with these tighter little frames of online interaction. And you know this because this is your trade too, bringing the most out of that technological connection and still bringing people together, but also dispersing some of the learning. So they do some pre-reading, they do some pre-discovery, they can have conversations with their colleagues on platforms themselves. So we need to spend less time with them, but we can still give them an optimal experience. And we're now thinking, gosh, this is actually a really good opportunity for us to show what we can do when we compress it and build it into something that's still very experiential, but is just done by digital. So that's our new normal, really. We're creating different ways of doing what we're doing.
And I think you're right. I think you'll see that kind of template almost kind of fit across a number of disciplines, whether that's resourcing, whether that's L&D, OD, HR, senior management meetings, whatever that might be. It's interesting. So bear in mind, we've got some very credible established HR folk on the call today. What would your recommendations, thoughts, ideas, etc. be on what do we leave behind? What do we not bring with us into this new normal?
So I do think we leave behind some of that constant drain, that real, I guess you'd say, sort of locked down feel. Even though we were free to move, we were locked down in what we could do to explore who we were, what value we could add, and so on. So I think it's a chance for people to start thinking, hang on, what am I here for? How do I do it best? What do I need from other people, both physically? So there's probably something in job design that we ought to start thinking, let's almost crowdsource some of this and bring people into the design process for what their new working way looks like. And I was on a podcast conversation with some Americans yesterday, and we were talking about leadership, and it kind of struck me that we were talking about lots of things about what we don't want leaders to be anymore. And I thought, what do we really want leaders to be, both in HR and, the functions? We need them to be much more about choice rather than control. And I'd love to think that HR could, again, I think, establish a serious amount of credibility with its workers by saying, when we needed to, we looked after you, and we had to create a controlling environment to disperse people. In returning to some semblance of what we would call our new normal, we would like to create more choice with you, because we don't really have all the answers. We don't know what your anxieties and needs now are. You do. Let's work together. Now, I don't want that to sound like it's some ridiculously long, drawn-out consultation exercise, but I think we can create like cells of people who are doing similar work and kind of collaborate and say, hey, why don't you get together, design some of the ways you want to work, come to us, and we can check it against legal obligations, well-being needs, all those kind of morality features. So we add a sprinkling of expertise to it, of course, but I'd love to think that people are now going to create choices about what work looks like post-pandemic.
So do you think the kind of the leave behind versus the new normal is around the mindset of what people have in regards to what they feel comfortable with, where the growth versus fixed mindset is, where the challenge is in those kind of conversations, how they challenge their leaders and how they challenge themselves?
So there's a practice out in the sort of world of, I suppose you'd say, again, very inclusive organisations called non-violent communication. And even the title of that I find a little bit obtuse. It's like, why even put the word violent in there? It's more compassionate conversations and very considerate ways of being with people, so that actually a challenge doesn't feel like it's an arm wrestle. It feels more like it's a co-creating kind of push and pull exercise between people to get to a good outcome. I don't think anybody has answers to anything we're talking about right now in this world, and even in the next emerging stages. So I think we need to get better at questions, and we do that, I think, together. So we say, what is the right question to ask here about what we need to do before we even think about what we need to do? And expect that we'll have to do a lot of experimentation and a lot of evaluation and a lot of adaptation before we ever get to something that we go, that feels like we can consolidate and solidify that now. Let's work on the next thing. So emergence, I think emergence is so vital, and people are often quite unhinged by that, because it's like, but it's not stable, it's not certain, I want that clarification. It's like, I think we've got to get very good at dealing with that uncertainty, and therefore we need each other to help us do that. Until I started to write some of my blog posts, I didn't know other people were feeling the same way about me, about a business collapsing and about what to do with, the people you've got working with you. And then all of a sudden I thought, oh my goodness me, there are loads of people out there having the same anxiety. All of a sudden I felt like I'd found some connected people. I'd never even met them before, who suddenly were messaging me every day going, I've got this idea, what about this? And I'd do the same thing. So I think it's co-creation, it's collaboration, it's all those things. So I think the challenges don't feel like they are less combative, but much more about exploration and sensing and experimentation. I'd love to see that kind of thing come through in HR, be the architect of a lot of that.
Absolutely. And any questions for Perry, please do pop them in the chat box as we keep going. I think if I'm sat here as a HRD, Perry, and I'm thinking exactly what you're saying, I'm bought in, I think you're absolutely in the right space, but you might be kind of circled by various SLT members that might not be in the same space as what you're talking about, or thinking, that middle management piece. How do I get them on board? What do I need to do to start trailblazing the kind of stuff that you're talking about in my organisation?
Yeah, and it does feel like that. It does feel like a bit of a trailblaze, because this is probably new territory for a lot of leaders as well. There's not many of us that have managed a crisis anywhere near like this. 2008 veterans might say, I was there before. It's like, that was totally different. So I think we need to almost like acknowledge that. So if I'm a senior leader with a group of leaders, I am quite considered in saying, we do not know what we're doing right now, and we should just accept the fact that we're all a bit stupid right now, because this is new stuff, right? And just get that off the table. No sign of macho experience and knowing. This is about admitting that we've got a ton of things we've got to do that we've never done before. So I'd get that one pretty clear, and then work out, I guess, what are the problems? Now, in the work I do with people on Agile, we sometimes have problems presented to us and we go, okay, that sounds good, let's work through that. And then we start to do a little bit of discovery work and then, well, hang on a minute, that's not the real problem. So, you know, something like we can't hire diverse graduates to a scheme, and we look into why. Where are they advertising? The culture actually just doesn't feel like it's inclusive enough to people of difference to apply. There's a bigger problem often that sits behind the problem that's presented to you. And so what I think HR directors are good at is saying, have you thought about every dimension of this problem? Is it a process thing, or is it an attitude thing? Is it a behavioral thing? Is it a bias thing? And I think we're pretty good at pulling those psychological frames out so that we can start to define a proper problem statement for this, which says we want to work remotely. We are concerned about productivity. We are also concerned about anxiety for people. So let's start from that point and build into productivity. And you could imagine then the workforce going, well, thank goodness they're listening to my concerns before they're plugging in some productive methods. Because I think we need to win hearts and minds more than we do logistics. And so I'd want to stand in that space with my leaders and go, let's get the people bit right at the start so that people can follow this thread and join in with us and help us. Otherwise, they're just going to expect us to have all the answers. When they don't work, they'll resent us. And we've lost ground. So it's very conversational. I think it's a little bit challenging in the right way, but I think in order to create more sense of connection between leaders and not just have HR director tell me the answer, I think it's like, well, let's work together on what the problem really is here, and let's get some good questions out and let's work on the answer together. Sounds a bit idealistic, but examples I've seen of particularly local government, CEOs have been more effective in getting people to do things like 48-hour setup of testing stations when they've admitted they don't know how to do this. And they will almost say, tell me what you need from me, and then I'll go do it. So almost like a servant leader model. So I think that can be done without conflict. I think that can be done without ego bruising. And I think it's a question of what are you most comfortable with as a leader with anything we're facing now? And then let's deal with what you're uncomfortable with, because between those two things, we can show up and do the right thing. So I'd say non-confrontational, conversational, and very much about a proper analytic about what is the problem and how do we involve people. Gosh, that was a long answer. Sorry.
But great, because you're starting to talk about the skills, the knowledge, the sharpening my own sword, sharpening my own tools to be able to lead my organisation through this. And I know pretty much in the webinars that we've had so far, you know, Sarah set up Peer Genius to support the HRD that might be the person who's supporting everybody else at this point, but who's looking after the HRD. So if I'm a HRD in that space at that moment, what would your top tips be to me? What should I be thinking about? Who should I be speaking to? What should I be considering at this time?
So I think one of the strong considerations we can show is that sort of empathy-based start from the people perspective, which doesn't mean that you've crossed the sort of void between leaders and the teams. It's you saying, actually, we have to have people with us in order to optimize and actualize this. So let's not look at how do we blanket instruct people to work from home. Let's think about people who have children, haven't got children, live in shared spaces, and scenario kind of model them out and start thinking, okay, if I'm this sort of person, these are the things that are important to me, and almost create different lines of need and then aggregate those into something that becomes like a proposition. Because I think when people can recognize you've thought about them in your approaches, they're much more likely to say, I'm in, I'll do it, let's get on with it. Whereas if we try and be, sort of gentle and just say that this is what we want you to do, they'll see the gaps and go, I'm uncertain, I feel unstable, I don't like it. And if we're too prescriptive, they're like, well, who are you to tell me how I feel? The middle ground is where we empathize with people and create almost like roadmaps of individuality, aggregate them into a sensible, workable solution, and make sure when we communicate with people, we tell them what we've done and even involve them as much as you can. So that would be a top tip of mine. Start from that perspective. The other thing I'm really interested about is this has changed how we describe value. And by that, I mean benefits and positive impact and that kind of thing. So I think we've often looked at financial value, we've perhaps looked at material value, you know, how much do we spend on our assets and what are they and all that kind of thing. Now I think we've got a really strong chance to start talking about human and social value as well. And so it would be a really good opportunity to start saying, do you realise that if we don't have people with us, and performance-wise, they're confused and their performance drops by 5%, no fault of their own, and we put that across the whole organisation, we're going to lose even more financial value and performance value and customer value. So therefore, let's think, how can we show a human value on creativity, adaptability, and so on, that shows a positive that we've delivered? And I had a coaching session with somebody who's working in the NHS right now on Friday in HR, and she was really struggling to influence the team that she was part of, because everybody else had a value statement saying, this costs this, this means this. She didn't have one. She's now going to create one because she wants to also be able to wave a value card in that mix and get people going, oh my goodness, yeah, we do need that, don't we? So I think you need some almost like force field of value in order for you to compete with those other voices in there that are obsessed at the moment about financial and material value. We need human and social value too. So those would probably be my two top tips.
Which is fascinating, because our default task, activity, response is everything that you were talking about around, and going back to a TED talk, I always recognise the picture of the matrix that you show up with, the human battery, you know, those are the things that drain those energy pieces on that human battery, isn't it? So yeah. Is this new thinking? Is this new? And if it's not, why has it taken us such a long time to start thinking in this way?
I don't think it's new thinking. I think it's been suppressed by people in leading positions who have kind of normalized a fixation on financial value and perhaps some kind of productivity value. I mean, you know, let's say marketing has done a pretty good job of saying Net Promoter Score is a reliable value metric. It kind of is, but I think it's still subject to a lot of uncertainty. Yet it's taken as gospel sometimes by a board that if an NPS is on the high, we're doing all right. It's like it's sampled, and yet the human capital stuff has rarely found its way into the same realm. So I think we have tried really hard to show the value of people, but we've been up against the mindset up to now. And I guess I can see nothing better than an example I picked up from an ICU medical practitioner who reported back that since COVID-19 has come in, they're making their own decisions, they're driving their own sort of dynamic, they don't have to fill in forms, they don't have to justify certain things. And they said, I'm actually loving my work again because I'm not a bureaucrat. I am a medical practitioner. And I wonder again whether we've done too much of that. We have introduced filtering in the name of efficiency to record stuff we never really needed to do. This crisis has rode roughshod over all of that. So in reconstructing it, I think we need to ask long and hard questions about, do we need that form? Do we need that process? Do we need that internal mechanic? And cleanse ourselves of some of that? Because I think a lot of people in the workforce would thank us for removing some of those obstacles while still retaining alignment, consistency, conversations that matter, career pathways, all those things can still be done. And I love the thought that we could, like I say, cleanse the machinery and turn it into a much more organic and very sort of well subscribed to version of purpose and culture and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. It's shaking our world in so many different ways, isn't it? Sarah, I know you've been having very similar conversations with some of your HR network around the humanistic perspective that this has brought to us, which we probably didn't see at the beginning of the year.
No, so I've been trying to get ahead really, just so I can have some things to share with the UK HR directors. So I've been trying to sort of pull on my network from the global HR directors that have, say, got plants in China that are sort of coming out of the lockdown, and asking them, so what are you seeing? What can we share? And it's quite interesting that there was a site in manufacturing plant in Mexico that they're fully running, almost like they need overtime, so they need to be hiring staff. But the staff that have been there for sort of the past 3 months don't want anyone external in, so they don't want to go through any recruitment. So sort of my sort of plea to everyone in this is that, like Perry said, we haven't got all the answers, but we're going to be coming across questions that we don't even know are going to come up. So from like an employee trust point of view, we never would have thought that that's how they'd be, that how they'd feel and behave, but they are. So they're more than willing to put in that overtime, do the extra, because they want to feel safe. So for me, it's in that, it's like what Perry said about that communication with the board, with your CEO. It is just about being really open. And I know even from the conversations we had on the wellbeing chat last week, it was a case of, oh no, this plan has landed at the door of HR. Where actually, no, it needs to be an inclusive business plan. So what does that look like for everybody? And like I said, that value is sort of being tested as well. So my heart does go out to sort of the HR population that really are up against it. But I think that's great what you've said, Perry, about asking those right questions, because nobody's got the answers at the moment. So probably my question to you, Perry, is you are coaching quite a lot of HR professionals at the moment. So how could we sort of build and keep that resilience, as it's not been easy at the moment?
No, very good point. And so I think what's happened is we have gone into an incredibly powerful response mode. There were so many of us who'd never even heard of furlough before, let alone dealt with a dispersed workforce and all sorts of safety issues and isolation and quarantining and so on. So I wouldn't be overstating it if I said how proud I was of the profession in terms of that response. I've heard some amazing stories about endeavours and feats where people have just overachieved like I don't know what. And of course there are some horror stories too, but ironically most of those horror stories are coming from where leaders are usurping HR and they're sacking people on 90-second Zoom calls and stuff, and that's been hideous. So how do we maintain it? Well, I guess there's a bit of it that talks about self-care, and as a network, one of the things I've always liked about HR is it is a very supportive network. I've rarely found anybody who's like, no, sod off, I'm not telling you that. We've been very sharing and open, and not risked any sort of commercial advantage or anything. We've been very collaborative in that space, and I think we've got to do that with some real passion and push, because there are lots of us that need some help, I think, who are working incredibly long hours. And I guess it comes from what you just described. It's like, well, who's in my network? Who can I rely on? Who can I tap up, and what can I give them, and what can we get from each other? So it's about forming allegiances, isn't it? I think the worst thing we could do is we sink within ourselves and just think, I've got to work so hard, I haven't got time for that stuff. Because there's nothing more energizing than like a half hour with somebody who helps you make sense on a crucial topic, gives you a bit of self-confidence and belief because they've played back to you how well they think it seems you're doing. That's an energy lift, and we need that. We absolutely need that. So people sometimes say, who's on your bench? That's the phrase, right? And what that really means to me is when you really need it, who do you know you are not just manipulating or utilizing? If you give them a call and say, I'd love to kick this round with you because I'm in a bit of a quandary, or I'm in a bit of a dilemma, or I'm a bit lost. And that stuff always comes back. So, you'll do it for them. And I think this power in this almost like family feel is I think often incredibly underrated. So I'm really happy to be stepping into coaching places for people in healthcare who are doing utterly amazing work. And I'm thinking, well, I'm sat here, what can I do? And so actually listening to them and helping and playing back to them, giving me a massive sense of value, but I'm also helping them clear the fog and believe in themselves a bit. So I think there's definitely that. It's find your bench and work out a little kind of concordat between you about how you can help each other out, and use that as almost like, the Avengers type of power source. Yeah, definitely go for that.
I love that. I think we have various sci-fi references as part of this call today. Loving it very much.
It's funny, I've described myself as Thor recently because people have been saying to me, how am I doing and
Love
stuff. Partly because I really like the character, right? But also I'm just kind of thinking, there's something about that whole, but Thor's only as good as the other Avengers around them type thing, So it's not about singling out. It's about what can you collectively create that gives you that lovely sense of support and guidance and advice. So yeah, let's be more the Avengers.
Yeah, fantastic. And I know that many people that I've spoken to recently, their experience is that actually they're now working really closely with people that they didn't know 2 months ago, 3 months ago. Both yourself and Sarah, we were strangers before this time, and now we're kind of, working very closely. So there's something about this period that's accelerated that relationship piece and brought out more, you said empathy earlier, Perry,
Yeah.
very much like the word I keep using is that humanistic piece. It's okay for you to see my house and my background and my dogs running around barking and the kids running around and me being late for a Zoom because I was homeschooling somebody, and we're all right with that stuff a lot more now than what we used to be. What's kind of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think we've had to work really hard at creating a strong social connection that isn't built around proximity, and that's not been a norm for us. We've been able to exercise that because even if we've got colleagues or clients that are dispersed, we're often with them in person, and there is a magic that's with people in the same space, don't get me wrong. But I think we're now starting to think, but hang on a minute, I can recreate or supplement some of that with this kind of connection. So you're right, you and I have never met, yet we've trusted each other to help and collaborate and do all sorts of things purely on the basis of the exchanges that we've got here. And I think that will become a new normal. And I think we were already starting to see some of the positives around online communities before social media went a bit sour and it became a bit divisive and people jumped on it from a very extremist point of view. So a lot of people backed off, but a lot of people are back in now because they've found the tribe, they've found the network, and they're being very collaborative about it. So I think we've had to put in some hard yards to get to that point. So you're right, relationship, I mean, don't get me wrong. I think one of the things I would say that's a little bit of a cliche is that it is all about relationships. And so the worst thing I think people could do in isolation is think that they can't have the quality of relationships with people because they're in lockdown. It's like, you just try, because you can make it, you can build it, and you can generate a different feel to it, but a very positive one too.
Yeah, your virtual Avengers, as you were talking about earlier. We've got a good question in from I think that's Rob Thomas we've got on the line there. Hello. What's some of the things that you see that the HR professionals need to let go of to be more effective in this emerging phase of recovery? Great question.
What a great question. So let go of. So I think the first thing we can let go of is apologising for being in HR for a start, because I've been guilty of that. Kind of thinking, well, I'm only in HR, so what right have I got to stand next to the ops director and say, no, listen to me? I think we've got to apologise. That's got to go, because look at the response we've had to take and look at how we've done it and how we've kept people together. And I think we were starting to emerge into more of that as more leaders in companies got tuned into things like well-being and employee experience and diversity and inclusion. They listened to us not just because it was legally bound, but because it made sense. Now I think we can be a bit more bullish about that. So I think we first let go of apologies. That doesn't mean to say we become arrogant, because I don't think we will, but we let go of that. I think we then let go of trying to fix everything into some shape of solidity, because the world clearly doesn't allow that anymore. Fixed is very much, I think, a bit of a myth. So I think we've got to create more fluidity, and within it, help people understand where they can find certainty within it that they need, but also adaptation. So I think we need to let go of rigidity and certainty while still holding on to something that's really helpful and founding and baselines, all sorts of things. I think we also need to let go of the fact that we may have accused ourselves in the past of not being very creative. I've heard that a lot from HR people. I wish I could be more creative, they say. And often when that comes out in conversation, it's a projection on the fact that the business they work in doesn't want them to be more creative. I think now they've got to have creative HR because of the fact that we've got creative scenarios around them. So this ask the right questions, get to the right nub of the problems, be more agile, responsive, dispersed, different. It's a massive call for creativity, I think, now. So if you've been sat on your hands a bit, I think you can let go of that now. And it's almost like, right, this is when I can really show what innovation looks like. And if you're worried about, perhaps you haven't got that quality in you because it's been knocked out of you for years, again, this is where your bench and your people come in, because you just need co-creators to help you with creativity. It's almost like a social sport sometimes, because somebody will have an idea, you'll build on it, and they'll think you're the most creative person there is, but you sparked off their original interaction. So let go of that. I think we can also let go of the fact that we were probably not business savvy enough. Because I think that I've heard that a lot too. People saying, well, you might know people, but you don't know business. I think we can now turn around and say, well, I think we do know people and business at the same time, actually, because we've kept you going. And that's not just pointing to this crisis. I think we've been starting to think a little bit more about the people business interplay, where most other people in corporations are still just focused entirely on the business interplay. The people bit has come back incredibly sharply into focus for a lot of them. We could smugly say, see, I told you so, but we won't do that because I think we're too professional for that. So I think we can now say business and people. We get that. So actually, maybe we could become a bit more powerful in shaping the decisions that are made at the senior levels. So they all sound like they're, you know, probably a little bit of a wish list at times for people, but I think they probably are what we could let go of now, not limiting beliefs anymore.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And just be careful of the perceived fork in the road when you're expected to go down the business continuity because you didn't plan for a virus. So that's what you need to focus on as HR professionals now, versus the creative, the high impact, the chair at the table that you're talking about. I think that might present itself potentially as well for some HR folks. So how would you deal with that situation if you've got a very bullish CEO that thinks sort of SWOT analysis, what happens next time this happens? You know, how would you deal with that?
There's a reason behind why they think that is absolutely a tactic that needs to be, you know, really hard baked and well enshrined and all that kind of stuff. So there's a kind of simple question that sort of pops into my mind sometimes when people say that. They'll say, let's get this going, and you sort of say, well, in what way? Because what I think you're trying to do is help them orchestrate beyond a concept or just a cliched reaction, and help them plot it a little bit further down the line. So that in what way thing kind of helps them build the rationale behind it, the mechanism for delivering it, and the impact it should have. And then I think there's a question which say, okay, is there something further upstream that we can look at that would create something that's even better than that thing you're describing here? So if they're saying we need a new business continuity plan based all around pandemics, it'd be like, okay, so in what way would that differ from what we've got? And just kind of use that question in to tease it out. And again, not be confrontational about it, but just help them explore it a bit more. Then go upstream. Is there a better way to have a more responsive business continuity, almost like theme? And if they say, well, what do you mean by that? You can start talking about, well, actually, when it came to it, who got the business continuity plan out of the drawer? Nobody. What did we do? We sat around and we said what we're going to do, and we prioritized certain things, and we never went back and checked that plan. We might have known it, but was it alive? Not really. So is there a way to create more, I suppose you'd say, sort of ownership about business continuity? And that might be what we do. We say, well, let's get more people involved in a simulation or a retrospective about what happened. So, okay, so if something like this happens again, let's play it through. Let's understand it and rehearse it and become so well versed. It's a bit like energy companies I've worked with have the safety drill at 10 o'clock. And there are some people who are sat in a desk kind of going, what do I need to do this for? It's like, well, you might be at a desk now, but you might not be if there's an emergency. So I think we've got to almost habitualize certain responses without it becoming a process that's only one track. I think we need to be that creative source. But I think business continuity has now become something we're known for because of what we did in response to this. So I think we've got a strong case to say, well, let's work with the techies and the buildings people and so on, and let's create something that's much more about a rehearsed activity that we're confident and comfortable in, and that we know we don't have to, you know, slavishly follow one process or just panic like hell and just do whatever pops into our heads.
Yeah, which, you know, undoubtedly a lot of us have been in that space recently, I think, haven't we? So Sarah,
Yeah.
I come to you. I know some of the HRDs that you've been coaching and counselling and stuff, kind of really in that Maslow's hierarchy, that survival level, haven't they?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's really interesting what you've said sort of about that bench. And I'm really passionate about sort of commercial HR and not being business savvy. And I think it's really important to look at how internal and externally is that list. So is it that you need to go outside of your organisation to speak to someone that is at the forefront of technology, that isn't in HR as well, to really get that insight as well, and maybe have some sort of external networking? Or I know that I went to the National Sales Conference this year, and I was astonished to see that they had an actual case study of a really well-known brand saying that we only hear about HR when the sales manager's drowning. And I was there going, oh my goodness, like, where's the HR director for this company? But it was really interesting to see the challenges that an internal department and profession are facing as well. So that really sort of opened my eyes up. But my question out would be to the HR professionals: how often do you sit in a sales meeting, marketing meeting? How often do you go externally to go to these conferences and really find out what's at the forefront of how we as a business need to be savvy, and any new products or services we need to go into in order to be that commercial mindset and us get up to speed as those HR professionals?
That's an interesting one.
Yeah.
I guess I'm thinking, when you say commercial, I mean, that to me doesn't just mean profit. That means running a business with the resources you have is in as optimal a way as possible. And you know, I'm not going to sort of name names or insult anybody, but I've been into some of the well-known brands who are hemorrhaging like loss all over the place with ineffective people processes, with, you know, capital brilliant jerks who are just creating this recruitment churn, and people really value that. They really put a value on, you know, okay, there might be some investigation if there's high turnover in a certain area, but rarely do they value, in the truest sense of the word, what is it costing us to keep recruiting in an area like sales and customer service, where actually turnover is really high and there might be some reasoning behind it. They just think about it as a necessity. I came across one company that had 110% turnover. I'm like, God, that's like ridiculous. And I started to work out some maths on that just based on what I know. And I'm thinking there's probably tens of millions being wasted that they're not really taking because they just think that's an industry norm. It's like, oh dear, that's got to be arrested. And we could show real commercial value and human value if we can get upstream on that problem and work out what is going on in that culture. And the other interesting thing about commercial is property. Now, social distancing in an office and meeting rooms and training rooms and conference rooms. This is becoming something that I know is already taxing the property people. And I also know of an example where one legal firm has already found out that they're unlikely to want everybody to come back into the office. So they went to their property people and said, how much are we going to save then if we give up half the floor space because we don't think we're going to get them in? And the property person's response was, well, actually, we've been telling you this for ages because you're only on 48% occupancy anyway because people are out, they're doing this and flexible and stuff. And they're like, okay, so what's that costing us a year? £9 million. So they're spending £18 million on building space, effectively wasting £9 million a year. And they found that out. And then went, oh my goodness, so can we carry on doing this and save? They're like, we've been telling it for years, but of course. And they've in fact worked out a way to do more smart scheduling that means they can save them even more money. And we have to get involved in that conversation because where people work and how they interact and stuff is part of our game. So I think the property people, the commercial side, the financial side, and us, we've got to have this kind of tete-a-tete amongst us and kind of go, how can we create some optimal, experimental, evidence-revealing, financially viable, humane ways forward? I don't think the answers are all within us, but I think we can hold that core and bring people to it.
Goes back to those questions you were saying, Perry, isn't it? Asking the right questions. We've got another comment and question in the chat box, actually. I wonder if the features that you talk about as a business continuity is also true of business more generally, which is kind of where you were going, I think, Perry, there, and the role that we play in cultivating this modern agile leadership, which might be seen as counterintuitive, given how people have traditionally been well educated and what served them well. So it's what you've always grasped onto, isn't it?
Nailed it there. And this is the normal thing I was rejecting somewhat. Now, one of the things I've been talking to during this sort of COVID, sort of, I suppose you'd say, forced contemplative state is educationalists. And I am sort of really thinking, is this also a chance to think about how we do education, not just where and when we do education because of the dispersed nature of it and so on and so forth. And I think it kind of all tracks back to that, because as soon as we step into that regulated, rigorous, timetabled, formulaic, line by line environment, we take it into our working space. And perhaps only if we have an anarchic tendency do we break out of that and say, no, I don't want to do that. And that's, so I think there is some conditioning. Now, I'm not suggesting we have to start with education and wait for a generation. I think we can bleed some of it back into the education system, particularly with universities and so on. But I think if we in the workplace can break the mold and create much more flexibility, choice, fluidity, and as Rich was talking about, agile, particularly from leaders who are more responsive to the needs around them, then I think that will create a very compelling way of people coming through the education system going, now teach me this, and they'll want to know it before they step foot in an organization. I still find it incredible that employability between universities and organizations is often about how to get a good CV and interview conduct. I'm like, you're not preparing anybody for the charade and the you know, the kind of political environment that workplace is and how to navigate it. And I wonder whether there might be this different way of transitioning people into a workplace that is now not recognizable because of pandemic reaction, so that they won't just turn up at a place and be trained and sit in a desk and do, they might have to work from home or a third space. How does that happen? So I think, again, HR can stretch out a little bit and say induction, as we used to call it, or onboarding, is now not talking heads for a day and a couple of e-learning lessons and a bit of shadowing. It is now something we start from the moment you are interested in working with us, and we will give you things and we will create experiences and we will get you feeling like you belong, even if you never turn up to a physical space for your first 4 months or whatever. That requires some serious new thinking, and I think that requires us to show the agility in business that I think will create a little bit of a pull into the education world too. And I think we can pioneer a lot of that change with our sort of links to the technology side, of course. But I think we've got a strong position to create the workplace of the future that I've been hoping would arrive in my lifetime. I think it's just landed with a big dollop.
I think you're absolutely right. I remember working at LV 10 years ago, British Gas 5 years ago, talking about the agent of the future working from home and you're not having to buy big spaces and call centres and things like that. But it's funny how this pandemic has accelerated all of that within 2 months, which that thinking's been gone for 10, 20 years, that we never quite got there, did we? So
totally. Two stories that back you up on that. One is from academia, where somebody has said they have seen in 2 months more change in the way academia is looked at and delivered than in 20 years. That's pretty stark. And then I heard from good faith that Barclays apparently yesterday declared that they are investing in a third of their workforce permanently working remotely or having the choice to work remotely. So they're only ever expecting 2/3 to ever go back into a branch or an office or an outlet. Now that's pretty big, and that may have a cascade effect out on all sorts of people. My little alarm company who service my house alarm, all their people are working from home. They've said, we're going to give up our office space, we're going to carry on like this. And I think we'll see a lot more of that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Just aware we got kind of like into our last 5 minutes, 6 minutes. That's flown, isn't it? Oh my gosh, how quickly has that gone? So what's next for Perry? What's next for PTHR? What's the next year look like for you guys? Where's your heads at?
So I still want to be part of some form of energy source / catalytic space creator or whatever, to get as many of us in this profession to do that thing I talked about, being confident and going into spaces and go, right, now's our time. Peter Cheese has been talking about never been a better time to be in HR for quite some time. And I think that's come true now, because I think now we've got right credibility and creativity. Let's do some stuff, and I'd love to still be part of that by helping HR teams, by doing stuff like this that sparks some thoughts and just lending all sorts of things. I think we're going to enter into a cycle where it isn't just perhaps, I don't know, some program from McKinsey or CIPD direct something. I'd love to think that we could aggregate all the cool stuff that's going on in the profession and somehow sort of push that through so others can build and feel that. And I just want to be part of that. So I don't know how yet, but I just really see the sense that we've got a superb opportunity to give ourselves a big leg up in terms of influence for the right reasons, and thank ourselves in the future for being like that. Like in 5-10 years time, we'll go, oh, I'm glad we did that at that time, and we stood firm and we created something that was very different. And so I'm building something to help that. So trying to create more agility, responsiveness, creativity. I call them business reinvention labs. I'd love us to run loads of labs with people, not training courses, not programs, but labs where people come, co-create, experiment, build something, test it, and then roll it out, because I think we're going to need some help. So I think that's where I'd like to be, helping the profession and the profession helping itself, and people coming to help us too.
Yeah, fantastic. And that creativity that you're talking about. And I'm going to mention it because I know you're probably too humble to mention it, but I know you've kind of, books, tell us about the books, what you've been writing, what you've been doing.
So this one's out already. It came out in 2017, so it's called Transformational HR. I am doing a revised version of it for publication in 2021 with new case studies and new insights. So my goodness me, it's going to be influenced a bit by pandemic reactions. But then later this year, August, it supposedly will happen. I've got a book out called The Energized Workplace, which if you've seen the TEDx talk, it kind of builds on that, stretches it out and talks about what we can do to design organizations more from people's energy, not just from competence and professional disciplines. Yeah, so it's August, that one's out. I've enjoyed reading that, writing that book a little bit less than the other one because I sort of grabbed it in between working, but I had to review it recently and it was just after lockdown and I thought, oh my goodness, is this book still relevant? And I was dreading reading it, I have to say. And by the time I went and sense checked it for spelling mistakes, I thought it might actually be more relevant now than it was when I originally wrote it. So I'm not promising it's got answers to some of our current problems, but I think it does pose some interesting thoughts about how we get people back into an energetic state about their work. Thank you for mentioning it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And from watching your TEDx talk, which I think is on TEDx website now, right? I think that's how I accessed it.
It's on TED.com.
TED.com,
yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah, I remember seeing your tweet about it. I remember watching that and thinking, I really resonate with the fact of coming home and feeling tired and grumpy and poorly and mentally unwell. And why am I not? I love my profession. Why am I not energized? And I love working with people. What's going on here? So that really resonated for me. And yeah, particularly well. So thank you for sharing your thoughts on that.
Thank you. Great.
Okay.
So, yeah, I guess that's done, I guess, isn't it?
Thank
you, Perry, so much. Sarah, just over to you for the last couple of words.
So thank you so much, Perry. I think everything that you say sort of resonates with me really, as in like we haven't got all the answers, but we're in this together. So for me, I think that you're a massive influencer in HR. So for my role is putting you on that platform. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And I'll send the link out to everyone as well on Transformational HR following as well. So be sure to check that out. And no pressure on the next book. We can't wait.
Yeah, let's see.
Yeah. Hopefully we'll get to the point where we can meet and get a signed copy at that point as well. So it's
got to happen at some point, I'm sure. It may be a distant thing, but
digital signature or something.
Yeah.
Okay,
we can do it.
But
all right,
we can. We'll find a way. Thanks everybody for joining us today. Again, the recording will be coming out as per Sarah, as per usual. Next week, Sarah, do you want to just give us a little bit of an intro for the special guest next week? Amazing, we've had Perry this week, and next week.
So I think it's like really evolved. So we had Erica last week in the hot seat. We've had Perry today, and next week we've got Dave Yorick. So when I did log on this morning, there was only about 16 places left, so it will be recorded. So if you can't get on here live, then obviously we can get in touch with you. But my email's on there, so if you want to get ahead of it and sign up to our mailing list, then obviously do send me your contact details. But I did send it out ahead of the time for the people that have been coming to these regularly. So hopefully everyone that sort of is sort of engaging in us has had that opportunity to book on.
Fabulous. Thanks everybody. Take care. Stay safe. See you again soon.
Bye.
Thank you,
Perry.
Bye.
Thank you, Erica.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.